The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, was not an isolated event, but rather the culmination of years of rising tensions, nationalist ambitions, and political instability in Europe. This single act, carried out by a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, is often viewed as the catalyst for World War I, but the reality is far more complex. The murder of Franz Ferdinand did not occur in a vacuum. It was the result of deep-rooted issues within Europe that had been simmering for decades, such as nationalism, militarism, imperialism, and the intricate system of alliances that bound the major powers together in a delicate and ultimately fatal balance. When examining the causes and consequences of the assassination in greater detail, we uncover a web of interrelated factors that shaped the 20th century. The Black Hand, a secret Serbian nationalist organization, played a critical role in the assassination plot. Led by Colonel Dragutin Dimitrijević, also known as Apis, the Black Hand was committed to the goal of creating a greater Serbia by uniting all South Slavs under one nation, free from Austro-Hungarian control. This drive for national unity was fueled by a broader sense of pan-Slavism, which sought to unite Slavic peoples across Europe. The Black Hand believed that eliminating Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, would destabilize the empire and advance their cause. Franz Ferdinand was seen as a threat, not only because of his position, but also because he had advocated for reforms that might have eased ethnic tensions within the empire, potentially undermining Serbian nationalist aspirations. The assassination took place against a backdrop of extreme political tension in the Balkans, a region that had already been the site of multiple conflicts and territorial disputes in the years leading up to 1914. Known as the powder keg of Europe, the Balkans were a region of overlapping national interests, particularly between Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and Russia. Serbia, emboldened by its victories in the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913, was increasingly seen as a threat by Austria-Hungary, which was concerned about the rise of Slavic nationalism within its borders. The complex web of alliances that existed between the major powers only added to the volatility of the situation. Austria-Hungary was allied with Germany, while Serbia had the backing of Russia, and through Russia, France and Britain were indirectly involved. The scientific advancements of the early 20th century also played a role in the outbreak of war, albeit in less obvious ways. One of the key factors was the increasing technological sophistication of military hardware. The major powers of Europe had been engaged in a massive arms race for years, with each nation striving to outdo the others in terms of weaponry, naval power, and military organization. This arms race was driven by advances in science and technology, particularly in fields like metallurgy, chemistry, and engineering, which allowed for the development of more powerful artillery, machine guns, and naval vessels. These new technologies made warfare on an unprecedented scale possible, and many military leaders and politicians believed that war was not only inevitable, but could also be won quickly and decisively due to these new capabilities. This belief in the power of modern technology contributed to the sense that diplomacy was less important than military preparedness, a mindset that ultimately contributed to the outbreak of war. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand and the subsequent July crisis can also be understood in the context of the growing influence of social Darwinism, a pseudo-scientific theory that applied Charles Darwin's ideas about natural selection to human societies. In the early 20th century, many political leaders and intellectuals believed that nations, like species, were locked in a struggle for survival, and that war was a natural and inevitable means of determining which nations were the fittest. This belief in the inevitability of conflict, combined with the rise of nationalism and militarism, made it more difficult for the major powers to find peaceful solutions to their disputes. The rigid mobilization plans that had been developed by the military leaders of the major powers were also a product of this mindset. Once the wheels of mobilization were set in motion, it was difficult, if not impossible, to stop them. This is why, once Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the conflict quickly escalated into a general European war. From a psychological and sociological standpoint, the assassination also reflects the increasing radicalization of political movements in the early 20th century. Groups like the Black Hand, as well as anarchist and nationalist movements across Europe, were willing to use violence and terrorism to achieve their goals. The use of assassination as a political tool was not unique to the Balkans. In fact, Europe had experienced a wave of political assassinations in the decades leading up to World War I. In 1900, King Umberto III of Italy was assassinated by an anarchist, and in 1908, King Carlos I of Portugal was killed by Republican revolutionaries. These assassinations were part of a broader trend of political violence that reflected the growing discontent with the old order and the desire for radical change. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand did not just set off a chain reaction among the major powers, it also revealed the fragility of the European diplomatic system. The alliances and treaties that bound the major powers together were intended to maintain a balance of power and prevent any one nation from becoming too dominant. However, these alliances also had the unintended consequence of making a localized conflict much more likely to escalate into a global one. Austria-Hungary's decision to declare war on Serbia was backed by Germany, which had given Austria-Hungary a so-called blank check, effectively promising unconditional support. Russia, in turn, was bound by its alliance with Serbia and began to mobilize its forces in response to Austria-Hungary's aggression. This set off a domino effect, with Germany declaring war on Russia, France mobilizing in support of its Russian ally, and Britain entering the war after Germany violated Belgium's neutrality. The entire continent was soon engulfed in a war that no one had truly anticipated. The long-term consequences of the assassination and the war it precipitated were far-reaching. World War I fundamentally altered the political landscape of Europe and the world. The war led to the collapse of four major empires: the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires. In their place, new nations were created, particularly in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, where the old imperial boundaries were redrawn. The Russian Revolution of 1917, which was itself a direct consequence of the war, resulted in the establishment of the Soviet Union, a communist state that would play a central role in global politics throughout the 20th century. In addition to the geopolitical changes, the war had a profound impact on the social and cultural fabric of Europe. The enormous loss of life, combined with the physical and psychological trauma experienced by millions of soldiers and civilians, left deep scars on European society. The war also accelerated technological and industrial development, particularly in fields like aviation, medicine, and communications. However, these advances came at a terrible cost. The use of chemical weapons, trench warfare, and other brutal tactics during the war demonstrated the dark side of modern technology and the devastating potential of industrialized warfare. The Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended World War I, imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including significant territorial losses, military restrictions, and reparations payments. These punitive measures, combined with the economic and political instability that followed the war, created the conditions for the rise of fascism and the eventual outbreak of World War II. In this sense, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand can be seen as the event that set in motion a series of events that would shape the course of the 20th century.